Crises of Humanity, Chapter-1, Blue Planet Viewed from Stratosphere and Its Biological Environment. From Japan's surrender to the entrance of the material world. In 1945, Japan surrendered, and the Allied occupation forces landed in. We have been taught that they were devils who would massacre us if Japan loses. But in fact, the soldiers were simply ordinary people. Both soldiers and officers were light-hearted and clean, with a healthy good smell. During World War II, I was spending days with hunger, and any living creatures looked edible to me. Thus, young soldiers' abundance and friskiness astonished me at 11 years old, and I had an impression that they came from a totally different world. Both kids and adults adored their country's free, rich, and convenient lifestyle. I reflect that it was a turning point of our mindset from the only just survived Japanese ancient culture, in which people was cohabiting the flow of nature to a greedy freedom. When I joined a commercial airline, there were no washing machines and hot water supply system in the company's dorm. However, the world has surely entered into the oil civilization and the era of high growth. I did not have any strong will, but wanted to join the airline industry from a vague adoration to the sky. Luckily, the commercial airline accepted me, thanks to my mentor's recommendation. Several years passed since then, and aircrafts evolved onto jetliners, which opened the entrance door to the world of mega transportation. Earth view from the sky that I adored. That was in 1960s. I realized my dream and started flying in the sky. I was shocked with the fact that Metropolis's view from the sky was covered with smog. Although I joined the company as a ground staff, but the company changed my status to a pilot trainee, which was an unprecedented interdepartmental treatment. I took off for an exciting training flight under the blue sky, but about 1,000 meters high, I noticed a layer of air when I kept ascending. The real blue sky existed above the layer, and the metropolis beneath me was enveloped by dome-shaped light brown air. When I landed into the air dome to complete my training flight, although I wanted to keep flying, I smelled. People's sense might get accustomed to the smell, as we are in a toilet, and tend to regard the status normal. Reflecting from now, this experience coincided with the timing when several pollution lawsuits, such as asthma caused by smoke and soot emanated from industrial complexes, and diseases caused by mercury released into the sea by chemical companies, emerged as a serious political issue. Such man-made calamities are continuously occurring all over the world even now. I witnessed polluted rivers with white bubbles and dead fishes, the ocean where grease balls were floating. Some years later, as a regular crew, I was descending to an overseas city that boasted its world-renowned upscale residential area. I noticed that the city was settled down in the bottom of light brown air mass. However, at that time, air pollution was noticeable only over big cities. I could clearly see far beyond horizon through the transparent air when I was cruising over the ocean. Next issue drawn my attention when I was cruising on air route was tropical forests. Countries used to be covered by abundant green forest, which I had witnessed before, drastically changed its impression. Green forests were taken over by vast grassland or agricultural landscape after a while. A book I encountered when I started worrying about those environmental changes was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. In this book, Carson alerted the world. dispersion of poisonous chemical substances will result in spring where no birdies can sing. I believe that birds connected me with this book because I am a bird lover since my childhood. As I was read through the book, I was stumped to realize the fact that it was politically so difficult to have business enterprises suspend the production of causative substances. When I first flew, the earth seemed to me infinitively big, and, contrarily, I felt that human being was a tiny existence. However, the worldwide population then had exceeded 3 billion and kept mounting 70 to 80 million per annum. Around 1970, approximately a decade later, U Thant, Secretary General of UN, issued a warning. Unless all the countries around the world work together to tackle the counter-strategy against the blue planet's environmental deterioration within 10 years, it would get beyond the point of no return. U Thant's warning was echoed by the Club of Rome's limits of growth, that alerted consumption of human being can never exceed the Earth's capacity. Having read The Silent Spring and The Limits to Growth, I started telling people about the environmental deterioration witnessed by my own eyes from stratosphere. However, their typical reaction was, "Human beings are not idiots. We can manage through innovation of science technologies." I also approached legislators, but they did not finish my explanation, simply turned off the recorder and left. To the eyes of the people on the ground, 4 seasons were beautifully passing around, as if nothing had changed. The entire world entered into an era of rapid economic growth, in which people's consumption was doubling every several decades. That was the era when consumption was virtue. Oil shocks had occurred, which could have been God-given opportunities to review the control of mass consumption. But the world did not turn the steering to the direction to slow down the economic growth, but instead simply sought after new crude oil wells. Then the world entered 1980s, the future U Thant had warned. Within the 2 decades, population of human being had increased by 1.5 billion and reached 4.5 billion. As a consequence, in 1980s, consumption of human beings exceeded the Earth's alimentation capacity. For details, please refer to Chapter 5, Ecological Footprint. The fact was, ice on the Earth, including mountain glaciers and the Arctic sea ice, started melting tangibly, and many live species were annihilated during the period. A tangible change to human being denotes an instantaneous explosive shift, considering the pace of the Earth's evolution with a unit of thousands or even millions of years. After 1980s, consumption that has surpassed the Earth's capacity could not be purified and accumulated as residue. In proportion with the lack of countermeasures, the residue was inherited to the future generations as more deteriorated environment for living creatures. The crisis for human being does not exist in the inadequate energy resources, but in the increase in the residual pollution. A typical example of this notion is the global warming caused by the residual carbon dioxide pollution. By 1980s, the jet stream blowing around the Earth started unprecedentedly heavy snaking. Cold air mass exists on the north side of the jet stream, and warm air mass on the south side. When the jet stream snakes downward to the south, cold air mass comes down to the south along with the jet stream and may cause unseasonal heavy snow in the southern states in U.S. On the other hand, warm air mass goes up to the north and Alaska might be hit by an unprecedented heat wave. As air temperature rises, moisture in the air increases. Enormous volume of latent heat energy is released. When the increased moisture becomes rain, which has created more and more volatile weather, such as gigantic hurricanes and cataracts of rain and snow. A typical example is a super typhoon generated by the warmer ocean temperature. While aircraft's landing accidents have frequently happened, caused by the strong downburst generated by cumulonimbus, we airline pilots tackle trainings to escape from the downburst. Around the same time, I had opportunities to climb 3 mountains, between 5,500 to 5,800 meters high, in the vicinity of Mexico City. The glaciers and abundant snow I had witnessed at that time virtually disappeared when I flew over 10 years later. At the Everest, which I tried to climb following my instinct, a highly experienced Sherpa pointed out a declination of glaciers. Light brown air that existed only over megacities when I started flying has invaded up to the altitude of 10,000 meters when I retired. The clear horizon used to be viewed over the Pacific Ocean has become hazed. Due to the polluted brown air mass in between, even Arctic ice seen from stratosphere didn't look pure white. The ice on Greenland was like a snow melting ski resort during springtime. Even after completion of my assignment in Italy, which had been extremely enjoyable, I went to Europe to trek around the Alps almost every year. Feeling nostalgic about the scenery of those snow mountains, my wife and I visited there after a decade after my retirement and found the mountains with very scarce snow, which gave me a totally different impression. The glacier that had reached my foot retracted to far away. COPs, Conferences of Parties of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, have been convened many times. However, those COPs' main objective is not to reduce overall consumption in order to revert back to the sustainable Earth environment, but only to reduce consumption of fossil fuel. An international treaty, the Kyoto Protocol, was managed to be agreed upon at the COP3 held in 1997. However, the protocol itself has been struggling to work effectively, as major countries that consume fossil energy most have defected from the protocol and or refused to accept their quota. Number of conferences have been held since then, but really effective counter-strategies are being shunted aside. The foundation that supported the mass consumption in the 20th century was cheap resources and labor in poor countries and mega transportation capacity thanks to cheap crude oil. This structure has not changed even now, and the gap between the rich and the poor is currently rampant among youngsters in rich countries. The gap between the rich and the poor is, together with the global warming, is a major factor of the deterioration in the environment surrounding living creatures, and simultaneously the Pandora's box, a source of evils all over the world. What I had witnessed from stratosphere was a figure of the earth where dirt generated through the human being's consumption of various resources accumulated in the environment beyond its self-deification capacity. Science technologies that should have released human beings from constraints actually connected with the freedom of greedy. The existence of human beings has become gigantic, while the earth has been diminished due to heat wastage and offscoring generated through the mega consumption. If viewed from the moon, human beings are riding on the vehicle without speed limiter and accelerating all in a fog. even though they realize that a wall surely exists in front of them. We can consume only up until we crush into the wall. From my instinct, I am breathlessly watching whether or not we can screech to a halt in front of the wall. However, people seem to act as though they think, without boosting new energy resources, the engine would stall, put on the brake, only after an inspection of the speed meter, or create an even faster vehicle. But how to stop the vehicle is none of their business. Human beings really do not stop up until we hit the wall suddenly emerge from the dense fog. End of Chapter 1.